Here I am today, Michael Steele, former Lieutenant Governor, State of Maryland.
Yep.
Former head of the first African American to head the Republican National Committee, and probably the best person I can speak to kind of get a feel for what is going on with our political parties. What do you think? I really want to find out, Michael, from you, what you think the future is going to be for our political parties. I mean, you've been in the belly of the beast.
Yep.
I myself was on the executive board of the California Democratic Party. I got to see the insides of that monster.
Right. And probably, like me, regurgitated a few times, right?
Exactly. I mean, it just because you realize that people are for themselves. And they're not for the country.
Well,
so let's begin there.
Actually, that's a good place to start the conversation, because one of the foundational ideas, principles for me, really goes back to something unrelated to politics. I mean, a lot of people don't know, but I was in the seminary for a number of years, studying for the priesthood. I was an Augustinian seminarian. And one of the things that you really learn first is this idea of dying to self, where it's not about you.
Right, there's
there's something higher and more important than you. Now, for a lot of people, certainly in the area of religion, it's God and all of that. In politics, it's the people. It is that higher entity or perspective is not your own, but it is the people that send you into the state capitol or the nation's capital to represent them. And that sense of purpose, what we call servant leadership, I think has been sorely missed, put on the shelf in many cases. It is not necessarily reflected in this particular president, as it has been in previous presidents. And I think that sort of speaks more to the culture. I think in many respects, what a lot of people don't really like and are really coming to face with is that this president is a reflection of us in some degree.
Isn't it true? I mean, you look at the country since the 1980s, it really became about the person's, their own fulfillment, not necessarily the group, not necessarily the tribe,
right?
And our place in that.
And there's a particular sense that the orientation of this country has always been, I think, sort of bipolar in that regard. I mean, you hear people, it's like, individualism, but then you also have this sense of helping and being a part of the collective, being a part of a group of citizens, a village, a community.
Knowing that there's value to reciprocity. Reciprocity.
Right. So people are, I think, are naturally conflicted in that regard. Mm-hmm. And what stands out now is that you have a president who has taking down those barriers and is full throttle exposing himself. There's an image for you. In this new arena, and in one sense we shouldn't be surprised, because we saw the lead up to this. It was the takeoff of reality TV,
right,
where people are sitting around watching and commenting, laughing, pointing at the pain and travails and trials and tribulations of their fellow citizens.
Right.
We'd never done that culturally before. We'd never done that as people.
Because those were things we simply, that was someone else's laundry.
Well, it was someone else's laundry, but it was also something that you respected. In other words, there were lines that you would not cross in talking about your neighbor. You remember your mama saying, no, you shouldn't be talking about other people like that, right? Now your mama's the one engaging in the conversation. Right. She's engaging you in that conversation, and I think that has been a bigger part of this narrative that we see in, as what people like to call, the age of Trump. I just say it is the age of us, and we are only the ones that are going to change that. Mm-hmm. And we get to do it at the ballot box, but I think we also have to look a little bit deeper as to how our politics and why our politics is playing itself out the way it is, because our politics is a reflection of who we are.
Right, and when you think
about what we value.
Right, and what we value.
Yeah.
And frankly, when you look at these values, if I'm having a conversation and it can't get beyond what happened with the Kardashians this week, are these the people we really want at the ballot box?
That's a little messed up. But that's where we are. That's exactly where we are. It is that sort of in the moment, reality-based conversation that actually isn't real. It's actually not around reality. I could give a rat's patootie about what the Kardashians are doing tonight, but yet I'm told that it's important that I know.
Right, because you look like you're culturally deprived.
Right,
if you're in a conversation
right.
with someone, and you're trying to have a conversation about, where the 40 trillion went between 1995 and today, because it didn't go into infrastructure. But you can't even begin the conversation.
And we have a good idea where it went, but we don't want to own up to that. We don't want to own up to the misappropriation of our children's legacy by creating debt to put on their backs, by engaging in military actions that are unwarranted. I said it, and I will continue to say it on that particular side of it. When the Congress, when the White House, any White House, Barack's, Bush, Trump's, Reagan, doesn't matter, feels that they do not need to go before the American people to engage them in the conversation and ostensibly get their permission through the constitutional process, to get their permission to engage in military action, then you're undermining the very thing that a lot of constitutionalists and others out there are talking about, the Constitution itself. So it's those types of things that we've chipped away at over now a generation and a half, that I think we're now paying some of a price for.
Absolutely, because don't you feel it's really an abdication on the part of Congress that they are not demanding a vote on these military expeditions into Iraq, into Afghanistan, now possibly Russia and Iran and North Korea.
Well, and that's a very good point. And it's not pacifist, and it's not sort of you don't care about the country to say there's a constitutional process here, and you're asking me to send my child off to fight in battle. And okay, I get that's part of the bargain, but the other side of that bargain is you need to tell me something. Right. You need to explain to me why. You need to make the case. Imagine if Franklin Delano Roosevelt just came up and said, just all of a sudden start dispatching men overseas to fight a war that, we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. Okay, I got that. We want to respond to that. But after about year one or year two, and not with no communication, as to what we're doing and what the purpose is and how this ends for us, it strains credulity. So I've always looked at that moment as the defining of how you do this, the definition of how you play this out. And all of these ongoing, authorities to engage militarily. That's something that I think you find a lot of conservatives, certainly my libertarian conservative friends, raising flags about, because it goes counter to the constitutional principle that you take this to the Congress. The Congress then is told, ostensibly, that's the people, so the people are being told. And then we can go from there. And it's not just on matters of military, it's a matter of domestic policy, it's a matter on all those things that touch the lives of individuals out there on a day-to-day basis.
Do you think underlying all is a corruption in that we have a Congress? I mean, let's call it what it is. When we give campaign contributions, are we really giving bribes? I mean, is our Congress, are our presidential, our executive offices for sale? And is that the root of the problem?
I don't think it is the root of the problem, because the person who had $1 billion+ lost the last presidential election.
True, they did, didn't they?
The person who had the most money in a number of state races that I can think of, including my own in 2006 when I ran for the U.S. Senate, outraised Ben Cardin. I had more money than Ben Cardin, lost election. So that is almost kind of a false argument for me when you talk about how money plays in politics. I'm not saying it doesn't. It does play a role.
Because there's certainly statistical data that would say.
But at the end of the day, you still get to do the one thing that I could have $100 million in my pocket. I still get one vote. You get one vote. Now, I can use that $100 million to convince you to vote for my candidate, or that your candidate is lousy or whatever. But at the end of the day, we can't give up our responsibility as citizens and our own objective opinion and points of view about these candidates and the policies that they're espousing just because the guy has enough money to put a 30-second ad on television telling you he's a bum. Because if that were when you look at the numbers on Congress ranges somewhere between 10 and 19% approval, and yet every 2 years, 97% of them get reelected. What does that tell you? Well, it tells you that the people out there are falling back into a particular type. They bitch about one thing.
Absolutely.
All right? Mm-hmm. But their voting pattern tells you something very different that's counter to that. So the only way to break that is for them to start to say to themselves, yeah, I like you, but you know what? I just think we need to clean house all around.
Is part of that problem the two-party system? We get Tweedledee and Tweedledum?
Yeah, and I think the two parties have contributed to that, which is why I've paid so much attention to Emmanuel Macron and his election in Paris, in France, because he bested both parties. He bested both established parties, the conservative and their labor version in Paris. The two established parties got beat by a guy who came right up.
And Le Pen, not an established party, did quite well. In fact, she gained. She progressed. But that speaks to something different. That speaks to, within those circles, the organization of that movement and how it's beginning to manifest itself. That's something to look at or look to down the road, because that's the next story. That's the next chapter. But right now, you saw Macron do something that no one thought he could do. Right.
And that was to take down the leadership of the two existing major parties. Donald Trump did that in a way here.
He really did strike me as an iconoclast in that respect.
Exactly. As was Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
I still contend that had Bernie Sanders started his campaign, or caught fire a month earlier, or had 2 weeks more on the back end, he probably would have beat Hillary in that primary.
Or maybe didn't get a primary stolen from him in Massachusetts, California, Arizona.
There is that. But no, I think that's a good point. But I think Bernie also was like iconoclastic in that regard.
Absolutely. I mean, I was here in LA during the primary, and Hillary Clinton had an event, and Bill was there, and there had to be only 200 people there. Meanwhile, up in Ventura is Bernie with several thousand people crammed into a small...
But those 200 people were likely donors for Hillary, whereas those 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people were folks who were going to knock doors, put out signs, and who had a passion for Bernie. And that is right now the challenge the Democrats will face, is that within this party is this progressive voice that has risen strong, has claimed legitimacy, and has been legitimized by a presidential candidate, and I think will exact its pound of flesh, hopefully for the good, because I can tell you as a conservative, when it's for the bad, because we've seen these movements rise on the conservative side. Certainly you have the moral majority back in the 80s and 90s.
Because
Tea Party.
Doesn't it strike you as odd? In January 2016, a fellow by the name of John Michael Greer wrote a blog, and he said Trump will win because he is the only one speaking to class warfare.
That's it.
Isn't it peculiar that the concept of class warfare is being championed by the party that is traditionally conservative versus the one that is traditionally liberal and for the working man?
It is part and parcel of his success. It speaks to a progressive, if you will, sort of populist view. I mean, people forget Donald Trump is not a Republican.
Right.
Nor is Donald Trump especially a conservative. Donald Trump was probably, and has always been, more of a center-left kind of guy, to the extent that he adheres to any...
Right. I mean, look at him socially. He's
party
definitely
ideology.
A libertine.
Right. He's a yeah, that's a good way to put it. So, for him, he's agnostic on most things either party or both parties would stand for. I mean, the healthcare debate is a very good example. He could give a rat's patootie about healthcare.
Yeah, his comment was, well, that's a little mean.
That's a little mean, right. And then he goes, well, okay, guys, go do it. And you're like, okay. So he's agnostic on that. What he cares about are the things that relate to what he's done.
Let me ask you something. Is that healthy? What he's if
no,
let's
I don't
say
think
if,
it's healthy.
If Trump is successful, is that good for us or bad for
no,
us?
I think success. No, oh, so okay, let's back this up.
Going back to that iconoclast.
Yeah.
Kind of.
If he's successful on infrastructure, yeah, then that's something that's going to benefit the country, which means he's going to have to make an argument to his conservative base, the folks inside the caucus, the Freedom Caucus, for example, and tell them why spending $1 trillion on infrastructure is a good thing. Mm-hmm. He's got to make that argument because right now they're not feeling
we really
it.
should be looking at $2 trillion there. But.
Well, but to your point, the president himself said after the inauguration, when he was caught on the fly talking about infrastructure, he did make that point. He said, yeah, it's probably more like $2 trillion when it's all said and done.
Because when you look at water, sewer,
right, you look at the whole. The complete package is about a $2 trillion plus investment. All right, so the question for the country is: are we willing to make that investment? At what price are we willing to pay for that investment? Meaning, are we willing to create debt that will be paid for by future generations? Or are we willing to suck it up as much now as possible and eat as much of that $2 trillion in current time, meaning you're prepared to raise taxes of a variety of forms? And we've already seen, what is the president's one sheet on his tax reform plan is? Well, those who make over $5 million a year, we may be bumping your taxes up to 44%. Why? Because he's recognizing at the end of the day, he's not going to get the pay-fors out of health care because Republicans can't get their act together on that. So repeal and replace, and by the way, can we just take that off the table and just say, as I've said for a year now, Obamacare will be the law of the land. And so now the goal has got to be to fix it. Mm-hmm. But fixing it has a cost. All right? So now you've got that cost on health care, you've got the cost on infrastructure, you've got the cost of tax reform, because while I may cut your taxes, I got to find that revenue from someplace else. All right? So these are all the pieces that the Republican governing majority has to come to grips with in terms of balancing. And they haven't, because it takes you into a space that goes counter to the arguments, the prevailing arguments you've been making over and over again. Ronald Reagan solved that problem for himself. George Bush solved that problem for himself. He went out and said, read my lips.
No new taxes.
But recognized once he became president, he couldn't honor that bargain because what mattered was the financial health of the country. And he paid the ultimate price for it. He lost an election because of it. And I think people today respect him more for that now than they did in the moment, certainly.
Because he was doing, here at the Center for Progressive Urban Politics, we're really trying to get beyond liberal versus conservative, Republican versus Democrat, and look to what is prudent to do versus imprudent. Because as you're kind of saying, let's say we had a business and we needed to keep up with the competition. We might have to make investments that are costly.
Yeah.
Or if the times are such, well, maybe we'll have to tighten our belt to stay afloat. And, do the prudent thing and wait it out. Right. So that's kind of where it seems where you're going with what you're saying.
No, exactly right. And so for me, as someone who served in government as lieutenant governor of my state, the one thing you realize very quickly when you're sitting down and you're doing your budget for the next year is priorities. It's the one word that Washington runs away from more than anything else is priorities. And the fact of the matter is, when you're dealing with making priorities, you're making hard choices. It's the guns and butter, and you're finding the balance between the guns and the butter. So there comes a point in our economy and in our experience where we say, we don't need as many guns, we need a little bit more butter. So you find that space, you find that ability to weigh. Doesn't mean, and the problem Washington has, and this is why they don't like really playing with this notion of priorities, is because they see a lot of this as zero sum.
Right.
So if I can't have guns, all right? If you want more butter, that means I can't have guns. No, it means you have less guns. It doesn't mean you can't have any, it just means you have less. And if we need more guns because of the world situation or whatever happens to be going on, doesn't mean nobody gets butter. It just means we get a little less butter. And it's a matter of setting priorities in terms of balancing where we are at the moment and how we meet the challenges of that moment. Fiscal policy, tax policy, healthcare policy, etc.
Right, because I heard it play out. I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and our outgoing mayor there, who'd been there for 12 years, he chose not to run. And he was kind of laughing because he was hearing all of the people that were campaigning for his office, and they're saying, we're going to do this and that. And he said, they only have 7% of the budget to do those things with. Because if you go beyond that, you're talking, all right, how many police are you going to get rid of?
Right.
How many fire?
That's right.
What maintenance is going to be cut on your sewer? All the, at the state and local level, you can't print money.
You can't.
You have to live somehow
you have to
within
live
your
within
means.
your means, and you have to set your priorities. So every state budget, every city budget, state's true too, because they're constitutionally mandated to budget, to balance in I think 49 of the states. But certainly at that level, with a mayor, city council, and how he or she is going to manage those priorities, they have a baseline. They've got police, fire, EMTs, they've got school teachers, they've got trash and sewer, they've got
what don't you want picked up?
They've got stormwater, they've got sidewalks. Those are baselines. That's the stuff you got to meet every year. So they don't have a lot of room to play around with and say that we're going to spend more on this, that, because that does mean for them, like the example you gave, I only got 7% out of a $500 million budget, out of a $1 billion budget, out of a $1 trillion budget. I only have this much. And I know at the state level for us in Maryland, as I'm sure it is in Pennsylvania, and I'm sure it is in other states around the country, 78% of your budget in any given year is made up of two things: education and healthcare.
So
That's
what are you going to cut?
So what are you going to cut? So now on a state level, you've got 22% for roads and bridges and all the other things that people, summer concerts, programs, and you got 22%. And so understanding that reality, and I think getting to the point where you can reprioritize, which is why the healthcare discussion is so important. Because if you're ever going to have an impact on that 35-40% of anybody's budget that's healthcare, you've got to have an honest conversation about what it costs.
Well, I know we're going off the reservation.
I know,
here
a little bit, sorry.
But no, I think it's good. Because when you look at healthcare and you look at the cost we pay per capita, it's higher than most countries. And yet, if you get ill in this country, you could very well go bankrupt with or without the ACA.
Right.
It's frightening. And I talk to so many people that, one, that the insurances, the premiums themselves are prohibitive.
Right.
How we really do need to have a conversation on how we can best and most cost-effectively administer our healthcare programs.
No, that's true, and I think that for me is a big part of my frustration with my own party. After 7 years, not having that conversation, not dealing with that reality, and coming to the table with a comprehensive strategy and plan that started with having your own members support it. I mean, think about that. After 7 years, and you don't even have your own team on board?
7 years in the wilderness when you could have been formulating and preparing for this.
Right, and so getting beyond the rhetoric of repeal and replace, and for Democrats, getting beyond the sanctimony of Obamacare, it's like,
because we knew it was a bad deal.
Right.
We knew it was a bad deal going.
The heavens open and the angels sing, and you're like, okay, but there are problems with the law.
Would you agree with me that the two good things about the ACA are no pre-existing condition?
Yep.
And that if you have a kid that just graduated college, you might be able to keep them on your health care plan for a few more years. Would you say they're the...
No, absolutely.
And why can't we just...
Well, but here's the irony. Those were proposals that Republicans supported back in the 1990s. So,
actually, every American, I think, supported because we all felt it. So
there's a test, and we've seen this play out. Take Obama's name off the ACA, and everybody loves it. So I'm sitting there going, okay. So we know what the problem is, right? It's our political demonization of the process, the players, in this case the president, to the point where we blind ourselves to making good policy. And instead of, and we've seen this play out now, Democrats not at the table with Republicans, just as Republicans weren't at the table with Democrats in 2009 and 2010. You cannot impact 1/6 of our nation's economy that way. You just can't. And as I wrote a piece that's now up on thehill.com, in which I say, Republicans, guess what? We own this. This is now ours, all right? And so the only way we're going to fix this problem, the solution is John McCain's words itself, regular order, all right?
Okay.
And working with Democrats. It's the only way. Someone's got to be the bigger person here. We can't get into this childish game of going back and forth. So if the Democrats win the White House in 4 years, are we going to replay all of this BS again? No, you got to break the cycle somewhere. Someone has to be the grown-up in the room to go, I know you guys didn't work with us the last time. I know this was hyper-partisan and hyper-political, but there's a kid out there right now who's concerned that he won't be able to get the insulin shots that he needs. There's a mom out there that's concerned that her parents are going to be kicked off of Medicaid, all right? We have to address that problem, and we have to do it in a bipartisan way with a common sense approach that actually, in my view, I can just tell you, just may wind up being a hybrid, where we're just a little bit Obama and we're a little bit market. You find that space and you create the avenues for people to decide at any point in their health journey that they can move easily between these worlds, because people's lives and circumstances change.
Right.
It's not static. I can tell you the number of guys who are, came out, they were hard charging, they were rich and they were wealthy, and today they're driving a truck.
Personally, 2 years ago, I was couch surfing. And thank God for the ACA, because I was paying $125 a month.
Right.
Now I'm with an insurance broker and I'm looking at about $1,200 a month in premiums.
Yeah.
So it's the fortunes come and go. You're right. And that's something that as a voter, as a citizen, impacts me. And I know it's impacting a lot of people across the country.
And you have to be prepared for that. As a legislative leader, you have to be willing to deal with that. You have to be willing to look at these situations more broadly globally. You got to look at them domestically. So healthcare is one example, foreign policy is another. Then you get into the minutia of various reforms, whether it's tax or infrastructure. All of these things are complicated. All of these things require money. They require time and resources. And the only expectation voters have out there, whether you're a hardcore Trumper, a never Trumper, whatever your view is, liberal, Democrat, conservative, Republican, he just wants somebody to pay attention and solve the problem. Just solve it. Put us on a pathway so that we know that in a year's time, we're not having to deal with this. We can at least begin to ease some of our concerns that we have, that this is going to continue to spiral out of control. And that I think is a lot of what drove the Trump vote in 2016.
I think a lot of people woke up and realized the system was not working for them.
It was not working for them. And he was the only person who spoke about that in a way in which they felt he gets it.
He gets it, and he's going to do something.
Doesn't mean his solutions are necessarily the right solutions. I don't subscribe to building a wall. I don't subscribe to alienating our Mexican brothers and sisters. I don't subscribe to alienating our Muslim brothers and sisters and locking people up and all of that. So there is that, but you have to deal with the front end issue
because,
of what animates and motivates people.
Let's say with immigration. You look at our most vulnerable economically, and they're the ones that are the most challenged by unbridled immigration.
Right.
So, yes, maybe the solution isn't building a wall, but it's going back to when my mother came to this country in the 50s, a well-regulated, functioning immigration system that ensured it works for everyone.
Right.
The citizen, the immigrant, everyone.
Everyone. And the frustration there for me is, for my party, we have forgotten that we were the party that defended the environment.
Look at California, Ronald Reagan.
Hello. We were the party that spoke to the immigrant and spoke about assimilation, not building walls. Mm-hmm. We were the party that embraced the words of the Statue of Liberty for every American and for everybody who wanted to be American. And I think as we struggle with this idea of what we value and what we hold true, that should not be a struggle. That should be the starting point. That should be the given. Mm-hmm. And I fear that it isn't today. And I think it's one of the things that in a longer conversation, certainly a longer narrative for Republicans, will come back to bite them in the ass.
Do you think the two political parties are going to survive? Do you think, for instance, in prior to the American Civil War, you had the Whigs who were just left the scene, and the Republican Party.
I think they will survive. I think they will survive differently, and they need to survive differently. I think both parties need to awaken to the fact that America is fundamentally changing. We don't know yet what it ultimately is going to look like. Mm-hmm. I think there's still more to come after Trump. Not necessarily that it is what Trump is and what he represents, but I think it's going to be a little bit more of the wild, wild west as we sort of settle in this new space. I think you will likely see the emergence of a third way, and I think where that is going to have the most value and the most impetus is going to be at the state level, at the grassroots level, local elections, more and more folks running as independents, running not away from the political structures, but pushing against those political structures and saying, we need more room.
Right.
We need to expand the space at the table. Because our needs are not being served. You no longer speak with our voice. You no longer speak to our issues. And I think those types of things are going to be important for the American people as they look at future generations of leaders and how they want to be best represented. I think that's good. Yes, our system is built against that. It doesn't allow for the emergence of it makes it very hard to get on ballots. It makes it very hard to raise money and find success. Okay, I like a challenge. And I think a lot of Americans do it. That is the quintessential American spirit. Mm-hmm. And I think those Americans who capture that spirit the best will be the ones who are able to get out there and claim an independent conversation with the people in their community and begin to change dynamically our politics on the ground.
Well, great. Well, I know you're a busy person, and thanks so much for sitting down with us
this
here.
was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
I did too. And I'm really looking forward to having our all the folks that tune in to our YouTube page when they take a look at it. We're looking forward to that and getting their commentary back.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for everything you have done and continue to do. And like you said, we're entering the Wild West. So
that's right.
Fence posts and six shooters for a while.
That's it. As the saying goes, strap in, folks. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Yeah. Michael, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you.
Bye-bye.
All righty.